Archaeologists in Georgia once found wild berries in a 4,300-year-old grave. And get this, they were still edible. They stayed preserved because they were cured in ancient honey. It's a substance that simply refuses to spoil. But, as it turns out, the reward of this eternal sweetness was, for a very long time, a very painful process. Humans have been collecting honey and protecting beehives since prehistory. Apiculture, or beekeeping, has been practiced for millennia, and it's probably one of the oldest things humans have ever done. We're going to look at how we transitioned from risking everything for a few drops of syrup to the precise science of the wooden box. And later, I'll explain a very specific measurement, the bee space, that fundamentally changed the entire industry. We can trace this appetite for sugar back at least 10,000 years. That's when the first depictions of humans gathering honey from wild bees start to appear. In Spain, specifically near Valencia, there are 8,000-year-old cave paintings that document the whole process. The artists didn't just paint the honey, they painted the struggle. You can see figures scaling lianas and dodging insects. It's a very early record of a very painful hobby. And this isn't just a local Spanish phenomenon. Mesolithic paintings from central India, specifically at Bhimbetka, show honey collection during the Mesolithic period. Then we move to southern Africa, where the San people relied on honey in prehistoric times. Their rock art, dating between 40,000 and 8,000 years ago, features bees and honeycombs alongside the hunters. From Spain to India to Australia and southern Africa, the evidence is the same. Humans were willing to climb, crawl, and get stung, repeatedly, for a taste of something sweet. It's a remarkably consistent commitment to physical suffering. Let's talk about the tools of the trade. For at least 9,000 years, humans have been exploiting bee-related products. We know this because archaeologists have found chemical residue of beeswax stretching across Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. It was a global obsession with a very painful price tag. If you wanted the honey, you had to deal with the bees. The solution was simple: confuse them. A tomb from the Old Kingdom period, specifically the 5th dynasty, about 4,400 years ago, shows workers blowing smoke into beehives to remove the honeycomb. By flooding the hive with smoke, the humans tricked the bees into thinking there was a forest fire. The bees reacted by gorging themselves on honey to prepare for a possible evacuation, which made them lethargic and far less likely to sting. This exact method, used between 2686 and 2181 BCE, is strikingly similar to how modern beekeepers still operate today. We basically figured out the cheat code for bees 4 millennia ago and just decided to keep using it. Now, not every honey hunter had to worry about being stung. In the Americas, the ancient Maya took a different approach by collecting honey from stingless bees of the genus Meliponini. This practice is known as meliponiculture. It was a much more peaceful arrangement, though the processing was tedious. To get the wax, the Maya used a method of pressing the honey out and then washing the residue to remove any remaining honey. It's a surprisingly efficient system, provided you have the patience for it. The risk here wasn't a swarm of angry insects, but rather the sheer amount of washing required to get a clean piece of wax. However, in other parts of the world, the risk was far more lethal than a sting. In the Sundarbans, the mangrove forests of India and Bangladesh, honey hunters face the Royal Bengal tiger. These predators view honey collectors as a slow-moving snack. The reward is a few kilograms of wild honey, and the cost can be a sudden, violent encounter with a 500-pound cat. It's a daring calculation, risking a tiger attack for a bit of liquid sugar. The danger-to-reward ratio here is genuinely staggering. About 5,100 years ago, during the founding of the First Dynasty in ancient Egypt, a very specific job title appeared in the records: the sealer of the honey. It's a very bureaucratic way to handle a luxury item. This official was not just filing paperwork. He was responsible for mounting expeditions to the desert to collect honey and resin from bee nests. Essentially, the pharaohs wanted their sugar, and they had a dispatched official to ensure the supply chain remained intact. Egyptian art shows that they maintained artificial hives for as long as 4,500 years, which is some of the earliest evidence of bee domestication. This was not a hobby. It was a state-sponsored activity. Even Pharaoh Ramses III explicitly stated in a manuscript that he made his people archers and collectors of honey. It seems the ancient Egyptian state viewed the ability to kill things with arrows and the ability to extract honey from an angry swarm of insects as equally essential military-grade skills. In Israel, at a site called Tel Rehov, archaeologists found something remarkably specific. Dated to 900 BC, the remains of 30 intact hives made of straw and sun-dried mud. This wasn't a colony of wild bees, it was a managed facility. Experts suggest that up to 100 hives could have been kept there, producing roughly 1,100 pounds of honey annually. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the weight of a full-grown male grizzly bear, all in liquid sugar. It was a mid-10th century BCE operation on an industrial scale. Meanwhile, in Egypt, the approach to hive construction was a bit more pragmatic. A 4th century BCE Egyptian papyrus advises that a hive of dung is better than a hive of stone for honeybees. It seems the bees preferred the insulation of waste over the architecture of monuments. From these early hubs, apiculture likely began in Egypt before spreading to Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. The practice moved through Mesopotamia, China, India, and Greece, turning a risky hunt into a structured global industry. Actually, the move toward managed hives had a very specific, very dry rhythm. In the Iliad, Homer describes bees storing honey in jars, which were essentially just repurposed containers acting as homes for the colonies. It was a very simple, very focused arrangement. By the 5th century BC, this practice had already reached China, marking the earliest mention of beekeeping in that region. But there is a weirder side to this. For centuries, in parts of England and Europe, there was a tradition called telling the bees. If a family member died or got married, the beekeeper would go to the hive and whisper the news to the bees. If they didn't, it was believed the bees would stop producing honey or simply fly away in protest. It's a strange form of anthropomorphism, treating an insect colony like a grieving relative who needs to be kept in the loop. We moved from fighting bees with smoke to treating them like members of the extended family. In the ancient Greek city of Knossos, the archaeological record shows that honey production was already a sophisticated operation. They didn't just have hives, they had honey extractors and smoking pots, indicating a systematic approach to the harvest. Meanwhile, across the ocean, the Maya were operating on a completely different scale. By the 3rd century BC, they had mastered their own form of apiculture. They didn't use boxes, but rather hollow horizontal logs, with one end enclosed by a disc of wood or stone to keep the colony secure. It was a massive domestic industry. When the Spanish arrived, they found that some Maya households were maintaining as many as 60 hives. That's a lot of insects to manage in one backyard, provided you don't mind the occasional sting in exchange for a steady supply of sweetness. While we've spent a lot of time on the sugar, there was another substance in the hive that was just as valuable and far less edible: beeswax. During the Bronze Age, this wasn't just for candles. It was a critical industrial material. Ancient craftsmen used it for lost wax casting to create copper objects. It's a precise process where a wax model is created, encased in clay, and then melted away to leave a void for the molten metal. We can see the evidence of this in objects found in Judea between 5,000 and 5,500 years ago, as well as in ancient Sumeria. It turns out that before we had a global supply chain for industrial plastics, We relied on the secretions of an insect to build the foundations of metallurgy, a very high price to pay in stings just to make a copper bowl. Most of the honey you buy today comes from the bees of the Apis genus, specifically the western honeybee. This species is native to Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. For thousands of years, we didn't just collect honey, we actively reshaped the insect. Through artificial selection, humans selected colonies that produced more honey, were less aggressive, and were hardier in cold weather. We essentially edited the bee's nature to suit our sweetness. This process reached a turning point with the discovery of the bee space. This is a precise gap of between 6 and 9 millimeters. If a gap is smaller than this, they'll fill it with propolis, a sticky resin they use as glue. If the gap is larger, they will build new honeycomb across it. By maintaining a gap exactly within this narrow range, beekeepers could create movable frames. This meant we could lift a comb out of the hive to harvest honey without destroying the entire nest or killing the colony. A few millimeters of precision shifted beekeeping from a destructive hunt to a sustainable industry. This relationship was so intense that it became spiritual. The Maya, for example, used honey in the creation of alcoholic drinks for rituals and worshipped bee and beekeeper gods. They didn't just see the bees as livestock, but as divine messengers. It's a strange thought. We spent centuries breeding for less aggression, and yet we had to worship the bees to ensure we didn't get stung. We managed the genetics, but we always kept the distance. Some people in the past had a very specific way of viewing their insects. In 1603, an English writer stated that the bee is a domestic insect because it is pliable to the benefit of the beekeeper. It's a strange, almost corporate view of nature. The idea that a wild, stinging insect can be pliable simply because we want something sweet is a very human way of pretending we are in charge. You have to wonder if the bee, working for the benefit of the beekeeper, is actually the one in control of the relationship. From 8,000-year-old cave paintings in Spain to the 6 to 9 millimeter precision of the modern bee space, our relationship with bees has always been a negotiation between desire and pain. We spent millennia climbing lianas, blowing smoke into hollow trees, and even building hives out of dung just to secure a few pounds of syrup. We eventually moved from the chaos of the wild hunt to the bureaucracy of the Egyptian sealer of the honey, and finally to the industrial scale of Tel Rehov. Yet, for all our selective breeding and sophisticated boxes, the fundamental deal remains the same. We provide the housing, and they provide the sugar. The irony is that honey is the only food that lasts forever, as seen in those 4,300-year-old Georgian berries, but the bees themselves remain managed, not truly domestic. They stay in our boxes only as long as they feel like it.